Veronica presents Part 3 of the AI Repertory Theatre's production of At the Earth's Core by Edgar Rice Burroughs. After a grueling march where Diane the Beautiful was taken by Phutra the Sly One, David and Perry are now about to enter the Mahars' underground city of Phutra. Chapter 5. Slaves.
As we descended the broad staircase which led to the main avenue of Phutra, I caught my first sight of the dominant race of the inner world. Involuntarily, I shrank back as one of the creatures approached to inspect us. A more hideous thing it would be impossible to imagine. The all-powerful Mahars of Pellucidar are great reptiles, some 6 or 8 feet in length, with long, narrow heads and great round eyes. Their beak-like mouths are lined with sharp, white fangs, and the backs of their huge lizard bodies are serrated into bony ridges from their necks to the end of their long tails. Their feet are equipped with 3 webbed toes, while from the forefeet, membranous wings, which are attached to their bodies just in front of the hind legs, protrude at an angle of 45 degrees toward the rear, ending in sharp points several feet above their bodies. I glanced at Perry as the thing passed me to inspect him. The old man was gazing at the horrid creature with wide, astonished eyes. When it passed on, he turned to me.
"A Rhamphorhynchus of the Middle Oolitic, David," he said. "But gad, how enormous! The largest remains we ever have discovered have never indicated a size greater than that attained by an ordinary crow."
As we continued on through the main avenue of Phutra, we saw many thousands of the creatures coming and going upon their daily duties. They paid but little attention to us. Phutra is laid out underground with a regularity that indicates remarkable engineering skill. It is hewn from solid limestone strata. The streets are broad and of a uniform height of 20 feet. At intervals, tubes pierce the roof of this underground city, and by means of lenses and reflectors transmit the sunlight, softened and diffused, to dispel what would otherwise be Cimmerian darkness. In like manner, air is introduced. Perry and I were taken, with Gak, to a large public building, where one of the Sagoths who had formed our guard explained to a Maharan official the circumstances surrounding our capture. The method of communication between these two was remarkable, in that no spoken words were exchanged. They employed a species of sign language. As I was to learn later, the Mahars have no ears, not any spoken language. Among themselves, they communicate by means of what Perry says must be a 6th sense, which is cognizant of a 4th dimension. I never did quite grasp him, though he endeavored to explain it to me upon numerous occasions. I suggested telepathy, but he said no, that it was not telepathy since they could only communicate when in each other's presence. Nor could they talk with the Sagoths or the other inhabitants of Pellucidar by the same method they used to converse with one another.
"What they do,"
said Perry,
"is to project their thoughts into the 4th dimension, when they become appreciable to the 6th sense of their listener. Do I make myself quite clear?"
"You do not, Perry," I replied. He shook his head in despair and returned to his work. They had set us to carrying a great accumulation of Maharan literature from one apartment to another, and there arranging it upon shelves. I suggested to Perry that we were in the public library of Phutra, but later, as he commenced to discover the key to their written language, he assured me that we were handling the ancient archives of the race. During this period, my thoughts were continually upon Diane the Beautiful. I was, of course, glad that she had escaped the Mahars, and the fate that had been suggested by the Sagoth who had threatened to purchase her upon our arrival at Phutra. I often wondered if the little party of fugitives had been overtaken by the guards who had returned to search for them. Sometimes I was not so sure but that I should have been more contented to know that Diane was here in Phutra than to think of her at the mercy of Phutra the Sly One. Gak, Perry, and I often talked together of possible escape, but the Saurian was so steeped in his lifelong belief that no one could escape from the Mahars except by a miracle that he was not much aid to us. His attitude was of one who waits for the miracle to come to him. At my suggestion, Perry and I fashioned some swords of scraps of iron which we discovered among some rubbish in the cells where we slept, for we were permitted almost unrestrained freedom of action within the limits of the building to which we had been assigned. So great were the number of slaves who waited upon the inhabitants of Phutra that none of us was apt to be overburdened with work, nor were our masters unkind to us. We hid our new weapons beneath the skins which formed our beds, and then Perry conceived the idea of making bows and arrows, weapons apparently unknown within Pellucidar. Next came shields, but these I found it easier to steal from the walls of the outer guard room of the building. We had completed these arrangements for our protection after leaving Phutra, when the Sagoths who had been sent to recapture the escaped prisoners returned with 4 of them, of whom Hooja was one. Diane and 2 others had eluded them. It so happened that Hooja was confined in the same building with us. He told Gak that he had not seen Diane or the others after releasing them within the dark grotto. What had become of them he had not the faintest conception. They might be wandering yet, lost within the labyrinthine tunnel, if not dead from starvation. I was now still further apprehensive as to the fate of Diane, and at this time, I imagine, came the first realization that my affection for the girl might be prompted by more than friendship. During my waking hours, she was constantly the subject of my thoughts, and when I slept, her dear face haunted my dreams. More than ever was I determined to escape the Mahars. Perry, I confided to the old man, if I have to search every inch of this diminutive world, I am going to find Diane the Beautiful and right the wrong I unintentionally did her. That was the excuse I made for Perry's benefit.
Diminutive world,
he scoffed.
You don't know what you are talking about, my boy.
And then he showed me a map of Pellucidar which he had recently discovered among the manuscript he was arranging.
Look,
he cried, pointing to it.
This is evidently water, and all this land. Do you notice the general configuration of the 2 areas? Where the oceans are upon the outer crust is land here. These relatively small areas of ocean follow the general lines of the continents of the outer world. We know that the crust of the globe is 500 miles in thickness. Then the inside diameter of Pellucidar must be 7,000 miles, and the superficial area 165,480,000 square miles. 3/4 of this is land. Think of it, a land area of 124,110,000 square miles. Our own world contains but 53 million square miles of land, the balance of its surface being covered by water. Just as we often compare nations by their relative land areas, so if we compare these 2 worlds in the same way, we have the strange anomaly of a larger world within a smaller one. Where within vast Pellucidar would you search for your Diane? Without stars, or moon, or changing sun, how could you find her, even though you knew where she might be found?
The proposition was a corker. It quite took my breath away, but I found that it left me all the more determined to attempt it. If Gak will accompany us, we may be able to do it, I suggested. Perry and I sought him out and put the question straight to him. Gak, I said, we are determined to escape from this bondage. Will you accompany us?
They will set the Thipdars upon us,
he said,
and then we shall be killed. But
he hesitated.
I would take the chance if I thought that I might possibly escape and return to my own people.
Could you find your way back to your own land?
Asked Perry.
And could you aid David in his search for Diane?
Yes.
But how
persisted Perry.
Could you travel to strange country without heavenly bodies or a compass to guide you?
Gak didn't know what Perry meant by heavenly bodies or a compass, but he assured us that you might blindfold any man of Pellucidar and carry him to the farthest corner of the world, yet he would be able to come directly to his own home again by the shortest route. He seemed surprised to think that we found anything wonderful in it. Perry said it must be some sort of homing instinct, such as is possessed by certain breeds of earthly pigeons. I didn't know, of course, but it gave me an idea. Then Diane could have found her way directly to her own people, I asked.
Surely,
replied Gak.
Unless some mighty beast of prey killed her.
I was for making the attempted escape at once, but both Perry and Gak counseled waiting for some propitious accident which would ensure us some small degree of success. I didn't see what accident could befall a whole community in a land of perpetual daylight, where the inhabitants had no fixed habits of sleep. Why, I am sure that some of the Mahars never sleep, while others may, at long intervals, crawl into the dark recesses beneath their dwellings and curl up in protracted slumber. Perry says that if a Mahar stays awake for 3 years, he will make up all his lost sleep in a long year's snooze. That may be all true, but I never saw but 3 of them asleep, and it was the sight of these 3 that gave me a suggestion for our means of escape. I had been searching about far below the levels that we slaves were supposed to frequent, possibly 50 feet beneath the main floor of the building, among a network of corridors and apartments, when I came suddenly upon 3 Mahars curled up upon a bed of skins. At first I thought they were dead, but later their regular breathing convinced me of my error. Like a flash, the thought came to me of the marvelous opportunity these sleeping reptiles offered as a means of eluding the watchfulness of our captors and the Sagoth guards. Hastening back to Perry, where he pored over a musty pile of, to me, meaningless hieroglyphics, I explained my plan to him. To my surprise, he was horrified.
"It would be murder, David,"
He cried. "Murder to kill a reptilian monster?" I asked in astonishment.
"Here they are not monsters, David,"
He replied.
"Here they are the dominant race. We are the monsters, the lower orders. In Pellucidar, evolution has progressed along different lines than upon the outer earth. These terrible convulsions of nature, time and time again, wiped out the existing species. But for this fact, some monster of the Saurozoic epoch might rule today upon our own world. We see here what might well have occurred in our own history, had conditions been what they have been here. Life within Pellucidar is far younger than upon the outer crust. Here, man has but reached a stage analogous to the Stone Age of our own world's history. But for countless millions of years, these reptiles have been progressing. Possibly it is the sixth sense, which I am sure they possess, that has given them an advantage over the other and more frightfully armed of their fellows. But this we may never know. They look upon us as we look upon the beasts of our fields, and I learn from their written records that other races of Mahars feed upon men. They keep them in great droves, as we keep cattle. They breed them most carefully, and when they are quite fat, they kill and eat them."
I shuddered.
"What is there horrible about it, David?"
The old man asked.
"They understand us no better than we understand the lower animals of our own world. Why, I have come across here very learned discussions of the question as to whether Gilax, that is men, have any means of communication. One writer claims that we do not even reason, that our every act is mechanical or instinctive. The dominant race of Pellucidar, David, have not yet learned that men converse among themselves or reason. Because we do not converse as they do, it is beyond them to imagine that we converse at all. It is thus that we reason in relation to the brutes of our own world. They know that the Sagoths have a spoken language, but they cannot comprehend it, or how it manifests itself, since they have no auditory apparatus. They believe that the motions of the lips alone convey the meaning. That the Sagoths can communicate with us is incomprehensible to them." "Yes, David,"
He concluded.
"it would entail murder to carry out your plan."
"Very well then, Perry," I replied. "I shall become a murderer." He got me to go over the plan again most carefully, and for some reason which was not at the time clear to me, insisted upon a very careful description of the apartments and corridors I had just explored.
"I wonder, David,"
He said at length,
"as you are determined to carry out your wild scheme, if we could not accomplish something of very real and lasting benefit for the human race of Pellucidar at the same time. Listen, I have learned much of a most surprising nature from these archives of the Mahars. That you may appreciate my plan, I shall briefly outline the history of the race. Once the males were all-powerful, but ages ago the females, little by little, assumed the mastery. For other ages, no noticeable change took place in the race of Mahars. It continued to progress under the intelligent and beneficent rule of the ladies. Science took vast strides. This was especially true of the sciences, which we know as biology and eugenics. Finally, a certain female scientist announced the fact that she had discovered a method whereby eggs might be fertilized by chemical means after they were laid. All true reptiles, you know, are hatched from eggs. What happened? Immediately, the necessity for males ceased to exist. The race was no longer dependent upon them. More ages elapsed until, at the present time, we find a race consisting exclusively of females. But here is the point. The secret of this chemical formula is kept by a single race of Mahars. It is in the city of Phutra, and, unless I am greatly in error, I judge from your description of the vaults through which you passed today that it lies hidden in the cellar of this building. For two reasons, they hide it away and guard it jealously. First, because upon it depends the very life of the race of Mahars, and second, owing to the fact that when it was public property, as at first so many were experimenting with it, that the danger of overpopulation became very grave. David, if we can escape and at the same time take with us this great secret, what will we not have accomplished for the human race within Pellucidar?
The very thought of it fairly overpowered me. Why, we too would be the means of placing the men of the inner world in their rightful place among created things. Only the Sagoths would then stand between them and absolute supremacy, and I was not quite sure but that the Sagoths owed all their power to the greater intelligence of the Mahars. I could not believe that these gorilla-like beasts were the mental superiors of the human race of Pellucidar. "Why, Perry," I exclaimed, "you and I may reclaim a whole world. Together we can lead the races of men out of the darkness of ignorance into the light of advancement and civilization. At one step, we may carry them from the age of stone to the 20th century. It's marvelous, absolutely marvelous just to think about it."
"David,"
said the old man,
"I believe that God sent us here for just that purpose. It shall be my life work to teach them His word, to lead them into the light of His mercy, while we are training their hearts and hands in the ways of culture and civilization."
"You are right, Perry," I said. "And while you are teaching them to pray, I'll be teaching them to fight, and between us, we'll make a race of men that will be an honor to us both." Gak had entered the apartment some time before we concluded our conversation, and now he wanted to know what we were so excited about. Perry thought we had best not tell him too much, and so I only explained that I had a plan for escape. When I had outlined it to him, he seemed about as horror-struck as Perry had been, but for a different reason. The hairy one only considered the horrible fate that would be ours were we discovered, but at last I prevailed upon him to accept my plan as the only feasible one, and when I had assured him that I would take all the responsibility for it were we captured, he accorded a reluctant assent.
Chapter 6. The Beginning of Horror.
Within Pellucidar, one time is as good as another. There were no nights to mask our attempted escape. All must be done in broad daylight, all but the work I had to do in the apartment beneath the building. So we determined to put our plan to an immediate test, lest the Mahars who made it possible should awake before I reached them. But we were doomed to disappointment, for no sooner had we reached the main floor of the building on our way to the pits beneath than we encountered hurrying bands of slaves being hastened under strong Sagoth guard out of the edifice to the avenue beyond. Other Sagoths were darting hither and thither in search of other slaves, and the moment that we appeared, we were pounced upon and hustled into the line of marching humans. What the purpose or nature of the general exodus we did not know, but presently through the line of captives ran the rumor that 2 escaped slaves had been recaptured, a man and a woman, and that we were marching to witness their punishment, for the man had killed a Sagoth of the detachment that had pursued and overtaken them. At the intelligence, my heart sprang to my throat, for I was sure that the 2 were of those who escaped in the dark grotto with Phutra the Sly One, and that Diane must be the woman. Gak thought so too, as did Perry. "Is there naught that we may do to save her?" I asked Gak.
Not,
he replied. Along the crowded avenue we marched, the guards showing unusual cruelty toward us, as though we too had been implicated in the murder of their fellow. The occasion was to serve as an object lesson to all other slaves of the danger and futility of attempted escape, and the fatal consequences of taking the life of a superior being. And so I imagine that Sagoths felt amply justified in making the entire proceeding as uncomfortable and painful to us as possible. They jabbed us with their spears and struck at us with the hatchets at the least provocation, and at no provocation at all. It was a most uncomfortable half-hour that we spent before we were finally herded through a low entrance into a huge building, the center of which was given up to a good-sized arena. Benches surrounded this open space upon 3 sides, and along the 4th were heaped huge boulders which rose in receding tiers toward the roof. At first, I couldn't make out the purpose of this mighty pile of rock, unless it were intended as a rough and picturesque background for the scenes which were enacted in the arena before it. But presently, after the wooden benches had been pretty well filled by slaves and Sagoths, I discovered the purpose of the boulders. For then the Mahars began to file into the enclosure. They marched directly across the arena toward the rocks upon the opposite side, where, spreading their bat-like wings, they rose above the high wall of the pit, settling down upon the boulders above. These were the reserved seats, the boxes of the elect. Reptiles that they are, the rough surface of a great stone is to them as plush as upholstery to us. Here they lolled, blinking their hideous eyes, and doubtless conversing with one another in their sixth sense, fourth dimension language. For the first time, I beheld their queen. She differed from the others in no feature that was appreciable to my earthly eyes. In fact, all Mahars look alike to me. But when she crossed the arena after the balance of her female subjects had found their boulders, she was preceded by a score of huge Sagoths, the largest I ever had seen. And on either side of her waddled a huge Thipdar, while behind came another score of Sagoth guardsmen. At the barrier, the Sagoths clambered up the steep side with truly ape-like agility, while behind them the haughty queen rose upon her wings with her 2 frightful dragons close beside her, and settled down upon the largest boulder of them all in the exact center of that side of the amphitheater which is reserved for the dominant race. Here she squatted, a most repulsive and uninteresting queen, though doubtless quite as well assured of her beauty and divine right to rule as the proudest monarch of the outer world. And then the music started, music without sound. The Mahars cannot hear, so the drums and fifes and horns of earthly bands are unknown among them. The band consists of a score or more Mahars. It filed out in the center of the arena, where the creatures upon the rocks might see it, and there it performed for 15 or 20 minutes. Their technique consisted in waving their tails and moving their heads in a regular succession of measured movements, resulting in a cadence which evidently pleased the eye of the Mahar, as the cadence of our own instrumental music pleases our ears. Sometimes the band took measured steps in unison to one side or the other, or backward and again forward. It all seemed very silly and meaningless to me, but at the end of the first piece, the Mahars upon the rocks showed the first indications of enthusiasm that I had seen displayed by the dominant race of Pellucidar. They beat their great wings up and down and smote their rocky perches with their mighty tails until the ground shook. Then the band started another piece, and all was again as silent as the grave. That was one great beauty about Mahar music. If you didn't happen to like a piece that was being played, all you had to do was shut your eyes. When the band had exhausted its repertory, it took wing and settled upon the rocks above and behind the queen. Then the business of the day was on. A man and woman were pushed into the arena by a couple of Sagoth guardsmen. I leaned forward in my seat to scrutinize the female, hoping against hope that she might prove to be another than Diane the Beautiful. Her back was toward me for a while, and the sight of the great mass of raven hair piled high upon her head filled me with alarm. Presently, a door in one side of the arena wall was opened to admit a huge, shaggy, bull-like creature.
A boss,
whispered Perry excitedly.
His kind roamed the outer crust with the cave bear and the mammoth ages and ages ago. We have been carried back 1,000,000 years, David, to the childhood of a planet. Is it not wondrous?
But I saw only the raven hair of a half-naked girl, and my heart stood still in dumb misery at the sight of her, nor had I any eyes for the wonders of natural history. But for Perry and Gak, I should have leaped to the floor of the arena and shared whatever fate lay in store for this priceless treasure of the Stone Age. With the advent of the boss, they call the thing a thag within Pellucidar, 2 spears were tossed into the arena at the feet of the prisoners. It seemed to me that a bean shooter would have been as effective against the mighty monster as these pitiful weapons. As the animal approached the 2, bellowing and pawing the ground with the strength of many earthly bulls, another door directly beneath us was opened, and from it issued the most terrific roar that ever had fallen upon my outraged ears. I could not at first see the beast from which emanated this fearsome challenge, but the sound had the effect of bringing the two victims around with a sudden start. And then I saw the girl's face. She was not Diane. I could have wept for relief. And now, as the two stood frozen in terror, I saw the author of that fearsome sound creeping stealthily into view. It was a huge tiger, such as hunted the great boss through the jungles primeval when the world was young. In contour and markings, it was not unlike the noblest of the Bengals of our own world, but as its dimensions were exaggerated to colossal proportions, so too were its colorings exaggerated. Its vivid yellows fairly screamed aloud. Its whites were as eiderdown, its blacks glossy as the finest anthracite coal, and its coat long and shaggy as a mountain goat. That it is a beautiful animal there is no gainsaying, but if its size and colors are magnified here within Pellucidar, so is the ferocity of its disposition. It is not the occasional member of its species that is a manhunter. All are manhunters, but they do not confine their foraging to man alone, for there is no flesh or fish within Pellucidar that they will not eat with relish in the constant efforts which they make to furnish their huge carcasses with sufficient sustenance to maintain their mighty thews. Upon one side of the doomed pair, the thag bellowed and advanced, and upon the other, Tarag, the frightful, crept toward them with gaping mouth and dripping fangs. The man seized the spears, handing one of them to the woman. At the sound of the roaring of the tiger, the bull's bellowing became a veritable frenzy of rageful noise. Never in my life had I heard such an infernal din as the two brutes made, and to think it was all lost upon the hideous reptiles for whom the show was staged. The thag was charging now from one side, and the tarag from the other. The two puny things standing between them seemed already lost, but at the very moment that the beasts were upon them, the man grasped his companion by the arm, and together they leaped to one side, while the frenzied creatures came together like locomotives in collision. There ensued a battle royal, which for sustained and frightful ferocity transcends the power of imagination or description. Time and again, the colossal bull tossed the enormous tiger high into the air, but each time that the huge cat touched the ground, he returned to the encounter with apparently undiminished strength and seemingly increased ire. For a while, the man and woman busied themselves only with keeping out of the way of the two creatures, but finally I saw them separate, and each creep stealthily toward one of the combatants. The tiger was now upon the bull's broad back, clinging to the huge neck with powerful fangs, while its long, strong talons ripped the heavy hide into shreds and ribbons. For a moment, the bull stood bellowing and quivering with pain and rage, its cloven hooves widespread, its tail lashing viciously from side to side. And then, in a mad orgy of bucking, it went careening about the arena in frenzied attempt to unseat its rending rider. It was with difficulty that the girl avoided the first mad rush of the wounded animal. All its efforts to rid itself of the tiger seemed futile, until, in desperation, it threw itself upon the ground, rolling over and over. A little of this so disconcerted the tiger, knocking its breath from it, I imagine, that it lost its hold, and then, quick as a cat, the great thag was up again, and had buried those mighty horns deep in the tarag's abdomen, pinning him to the floor of the arena. The great cat clawed at the shaggy head until eyes and ears were gone, and naught but a few strips of ragged, bloody flesh remained upon the skull. Yet through all the agony of that fearful punishment, the thag still stood motionless, pinning down his adversary. And then the man leaped in, seeing that the blind bull would be the least formidable enemy, and ran his spear through the tarag's heart. As the animal's fierce clawing ceased, the bull raised his gory, sightless head, and with a horrid roar ran headlong across the arena. With great leaps and bounds he came, straight toward the arena wall directly beneath where we sat, and then accident carried him, in one of his mighty springs, completely over the barrier into the midst of the slaves and Sagoths just in front of us. Swinging his bloody horns from side to side, the beast cut a wide swath before him, straight upward toward our seats. Before him, slaves and gorilla men fought in mad stampede to escape the menace of the creature's death agonies, for such only could that frightful charge have been. Forgetful of us, our guards joined in the general rush for the exits, many of which pierced the wall of the amphitheater behind us. Perry, Gak, and I became separated in the chaos which reigned for a few moments after the beast cleared the wall of the arena, each intent upon saving his own hide. I ran to the right, passing several exits choked with the fear-mad mob that were battling to escape. One would have thought that an entire herd of thags was loose behind them, rather than a single, blinded, dying beast. But such is the effect of panic upon a crowd.
We hope you enjoyed part 3 of AIRT's production of At the Earth's Core by Edgar Rice Burroughs. If you would like more of this kind of story, please let us know in the comments.